All right, we're recording. How's it going?
Going pretty well, man. I like the shirt, brother.
Oh, thanks. It's from
It's
Ghana.
colorful. It's
Yeah,
beautiful.
got it from the motherland directly.
I wish I could say the same thing, but everything that comes out of Cuba is diseased.
Really?
It's just the production values on the island are not worth a damn.
Oh,
So
okay.
like anything you get from the island is usually falling apart by the time you get it.
Okay.
And it's really an agrarian society now, as much as it can be.
You said it's diseased, or
I was overstating it. Don't
okay?
pay attention.
Oh, okay.
It's bitterness. Sorry,
You're saying the quality is not so good.
quality is terrible from anything. It's typical. Well, it was like the Soviet Union. Yeah, they produced thousands of the item in question, but was the item any good? Usually not. Typically. So we had the last night of the DMC, and I think the most touching moment was a young boy who thanked Biden for helping him with his stuttering problem.
Oh, hadn't even been checking that out.
Yeah, some of the smaller segments are actually the gold here, in my opinion. I'm not real big on Bloomberg or some of the other guests that were there, but and I'm not going to mention names because there's no point. I mentioned Bloomberg because he's probably the biggest what the hell of the names, but um, and don't get me wrong. Like a zombie follower. I need every single one of my representatives to be up there, but damn it, man, some more relevant people would have been great.
Wait, so they had Bloomberg up there?
They had Bloomberg tonight, and I was like, vomit.
Um, how many days are left?
That's it. That's it. It's over.
Oh, okay. So they saved the best to last then, huh?
Well, they saved Biden for last, and Biden really made a kind of a heart-touching moment with the audience. He
Okay.
wasn't. He's not. He's not going for, say, the intellectual argument. He's
Hmm.
basically going for the emotional argument, which is just as good, to be honest. A lot
It's
of people
probably
need
better.
it.
It's probably better, actually.
Yeah, people need it at this point. They feel like the president doesn't give a shit, and they're probably right.
Well, not only that, but it's why Republicans do better, is because they understand human nature better. The
Well,
intellectual
they're
arguments.
not afraid to appeal to fear. I definitely agree with that one. Fear and the negative versions of our emotions.
Right. If you take the positive or negative out of it, the fact that they're appealing to emotion, that's what works.
Well, yeah, because people are emotional. I mean,
Yeah.
I hate to, I'm all for logic, but unfortunately, logic doesn't work. I've tried campaigns where I purely logically appeal that my candidate is better, and that stuff almost never works. To be honest with you, I had to make appeals to emotional levels for my candidates to break through.
We know this on a deep level, but for some reason, we
We
always
struggle
revert back.
against it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
we struggle against it because we assume that our voters can be enlightened, or not enlightened is not a good word, more informed, so that an emotional wouldn't work on them, that only an intellectual appeal could work on them. But
Hmm.
you know, the truth is that most people are emotional voters, and no matter where you are on the spectrum, left, right, up,
Hmm.
down, center, doesn't matter.
Yep. BA, select start.
Yes, and then you get infinite lives. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yep.
You know what's funny is that you mentioned that among the youngins, and they have no idea what we're talking about anymore.
Sure.
But
There's
amongst a certain age, that's like gold. That's like saying that's like the secret password for the club.
yeah. I've got a shirt with the NES controller on it.
With the Contra code?
No, not with the code. Just the NES controller, and it says classically trained.
Oh, I love that. That's cool.
Netflix has there's like a documentary about the come up of video games, like,
Oh, cool.
from like basically from the 70s and 80s, when they were getting really popular.
Right.
I've seen like some of it so far. It's pretty good so far. It showed
Hey,
you like
check this out, Flav.
Yeah.
This is on in the chat. When you have time, take a look at it. It's basically a sequel to the 47 Ronin, set in the cyberpunk future.
Okay.
It looks cool as hell, and it stars Keanu Reeves,
Oh, cool.
whom I love. I absolutely adore.
So this is coming out?
This is coming out. This is brand the first I've ever heard of it, but it's coming out.
Oh, cool.
It's from Slash Film, which is pretty reliable. I can't say that they've led me down any rabbit holes.
Sure. And speaking of your picture in the background there.
Oh, my octopi?
Yeah, they were showing how but that's singular, right? That's one octopus?
Octopus is a singular, yes.
Yeah.
Octopi is multiple. It's the scientific saying.
Yeah. But you just got one there, right?
Yeah.
I
always count 3 though because of my arms.
Oh. They were showing
that's a joke. That's a joke. Go on, bro. I'm thinking you stop.
Well, you can just keep firing them rapidly, and we'll see if the audience picks up.
Yeah.
The Space Invaders, the Japanese guy who created Space Invaders, grew up on what was the what was like the 50s? What was the big 50s story that got everyone scared about aliens?
War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds. So he grew up on that, and he was saying how, the aliens were basically octopi. If you look at them.
Right. Makes sense.
They're kind of like that octopi kind of thing. Kind of like how in the Matrix they have that octopi kind of
feel to
them. And so that was his idea for the aliens, and he kind of shows you how, if you look at Space Invaders, it was kind of created to look like
Space Invaders was not one of my favorites, to be honest with you, because it was so nerve-wracking. Once you get up to the higher levels, you're just running back and forth, and you're going so fast, I feel like I can't enjoy it anymore.
Well, that's funny that you say the higher levels, because the guy who created it admitted to not even being able to pass the first level.
Really?
Yeah. He said he was embarrassed. Like, he said it was so difficult. He couldn't get past the first level.
It is hard. It is much harder than a lot of the other games of the era.
Mm-hmm.
It's its own Dark Souls for the moment.
But it was like the first major breakout game.
Yeah, my favorite though, Flav, was Joust, because I love the physics in it, the flying physics.
Okay.
And
you gotta remind me of what that one was like.
That was the one with this was really weird. The ostriches and the knights on the ostrich that would fly around and collect eggs and kill the baddies and stuff.
Okay.
With like perfect hits of their lance.
Hey, what's up, Damien?
Hey guys, you're talking about Joust?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Another Joust fan?
Yeah, the ostrich would kill the pterodactyls and the other opponents. Yeah, that was a great game actually.
It was a really great game. It had multiple levels, which was interesting. Like, I don't mean levels like just raw levels, but I mean like, levels to the game that actually mattered. And I was like, wow, that's cool. The physics were really cool too. I have to say, physics-based gaming is like my niche.
Nice.
And did you like Pong?
I love Pong. Pong. I can't say for Damien, but
yeah, Pong was good. Joust was actually a really old school favorite of mine that I was sad to not see evolve later on, like watching the Mario Bros evolve.
Can you imagine a 3D version of Joust? That would be fun.
I feel like there was like a test go at that for the PC. There was like a first person attempt at it too. It just was a lot to load, and it was a little
gotcha.
You know, they didn't really put much effort into the development, and it's such a strange concept. I mean, you're riding an ostrich in space fighting pterodactyls. It's hard for people to really like open up.
No, it's very much a 70s, reefer concept, my friend. So it's definitely like, okay, man, now we have these knights, and they're on top of ostriches, and they collect eggs. And then the executive must have been like, the straight-laced executive must have been like, what the hell? I'll be right back, guys. I need to turn on my fan.
Okay.
Yeah, actually, I was looking into Emily's book quite a bit. Looking at.
You started checking it out?
Yeah, looked at a couple of reviews on it, a couple of excerpts. But actually, going down that rabbit hole led me to I felt like it was a much better book that I ended up running into.
Which book? Which book, Damien?
It's called How to Be Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi.
Oh, I heard that was good. You know,
that one's newer, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's.
I believe it's a year newer.
It's good though. It's, you know what it is. It's the perspective. Like a lot of what I was reading with White Fragility, it wasn't. It was good to read, but I wasn't really getting a lot of helpful poetic content out of it. But already, right in the introduction of this other one, How to Be Anti-Racist, it's like oozing with poetry. You know, I could like stop and take a paragraph and make a few haikus out of it. Like it's actually pretty well written, and it's the perspective though too. Is that like it's actually putting me in different shoes.
This book that I read is very similar. It's called Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. It's subtitled "I'm Still Here" by Austin Channing Brown, and she worked in the high stakes business world. And she talks a lot about the racism, the inherent racism of the systems there, and it reminded me so much of my mother entering the workforce after her divorce from my father, and encountering like high pressure kind of and sexist manner for kind of policies at the workplace.
I mean, I you know what it is? It's just that I love the concept of social structure, especially when you talk about the workplace, because there's a lot of curious structure there and economics of it. But it was just that it was the social construction of race in the United States as told by this white person with white people's perceptions on race. And it's like whiteness was as though it were a position of status, and the whole white supremacy that results from this positioning. I just kind of felt like, coming from her perspective, I wasn't really getting a lot of new information. Like, this was information that I've looked into, but also it's something that like I've actively taken part in learning, something that she actually mentions in the book that makes it seem like the book is really for somebody who like has been living in the color blindness entirely and like may not ever approached it before. So it's like a stepping stone, which is cool because it did truly work like a little stepping stone, just reading the summaries and reviews, because
how old is the White Fragility book? What year did it come out?
I don't recall the year. I just got her name, D'Angelo. I dove right into the content. I didn't even see the year on How to Be Anti-Racist either. I just, when it comes to these rabbit holes, I just dive right in. Time to me.
I'd be interested because a lot has come out in a few years, Yeah, so I'd be interested. Like when it came out, it might have been more of a new concept.
Yeah, I mean, what I was reading is a review from June 26, 2020. So I don't know if that can't be the date it was printed, but that's the review I was reading last.
This one is from last year, the one I shared with you guys.
What's the name of it?
I'm Still Here: Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness. I highly recommend it.
I do like that opening title there too. The "I'm Still Here," kind of referencing like there's still things being overlooked, because when it comes to a lot of social civil movements, that there was a lot of progression, but a lot of people got kind of left out, and I mentioned the complacency, like we got kind of compliant because like we got things we thought we would never get, but then like we just left the baton aside, left the torch behind us.
Well, I think that there's a kind of, you're right when you call it complacency, because what I see, for instance, what I see in let's say the current administration's America is a lot of complacency. It's like, I'm doing well, my family's doing well, why should I have to worry about all these people complaining about their thing? And what they don't realize is that we either sink together or we swim together.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as an individual. And I mean, there is, but we're individually psychic, but we're interlinked so heavily that if we all start to sink, watch us, we will all die. And that is the lesson I take from my own country and Cuba, that there was a lot of people that were comfortable with either the new regime or the old regime, and they didn't fight at all for what they believed in. So there was a lot of complacency going on, or a lot of promises being made that were being taken seriously, and perhaps from the source they shouldn't have been taken so seriously.
Yes.
I was quite surprised to hear someone say recently that that there's opportunities for everyone, and that race isn't the the big, I guess, divider or robber of opportunity that it once was.
I'm not so sure about that.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it seems like a very seems like a statement that
paraphrasing it badly as well. Like the statement came off even worse. Statement came off worse than that. The statement came off as in, like, for the most part, racism isn't like holding people back any longer.
I'm not so sure about that. I can't even agree to the base of that argument. It really depends. We talk, a group of my friends talk about the gatekeepers in a lot of things, but the gatekeepers in any other way would be institutional bigots of whatever they are not. And unfortunately, in business, in social circles, in religious circles, we see this institutional racism still exists, and in fact is more open than it has been in years.
Yeah, I think it was based on the false premise that for the most part we have laws to protect people from institutional racism. Right. I wanted to say, I mean, geez, like, we just passed a law that says that LGBTQ folks can't be discriminated against in the workplace. Like, we just passed that law. Now, what does that tell you? I mean, A, it was legal until recently in many states, and B, do you think people overnight are going to just change their ideals and minds and just follow the law, not only to the letter, but to the spirit? They're going to follow the law to the spirit. And when people are interviewed, that they're not going to look at one person differently than the other. And some people with acknowledged biases and some people with unacknowledged biases. I mean, it's just not going to happen. That's just not the way that it works. And,
I will say, however, though, given time, even the most staunch person can change their mind on a subject.
Well, they can, but what's the impetus, right? Like,
well, yeah. The impetus is usually somebody close to them is of that minority, of that segment of the population we're talking about. Like, for instance, I'll give you a perfect example. My dad married a woman whose brother is a gay man. And my dad for years had railed against homosexuals, when I was young. But he was, I mean, we're talking about somebody from the silent generation too. I don't want to make anybody assume that my dad is, 30s and this is happening.
Yeah.
So my dad is an older figure, but he changed his mind amazingly on this subject, and he even calls himself a defender now of an ally, as it were, without the language.
Well, for every person that does that, there are many people who are not going to do that,
right.
And there are many people who are going to have unacknowledged biases, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, there are people, they say when you look at a bunch of names on a paper, there are people who are less likely to get hired based on their name alone.
Oh, I know.
Sounding like what people consider ghetto-sounding names.
It's not just ghetto, but it's what. No, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. It's not just ghetto sounding to some people. It's also foreign.
Right.
I've been a big proponent of foreign candidates for office, and unfortunately, what I see is that the Mary Sues that I compete against get easily twice the amount of votes without doing half the work that I do.
Oh just looking at the
name,
right?
Just looking at the name, and so there is a lot of unacknowledged bias, but there needs to be a way that we present that there is such a problem, like a systematic problem, without making the people feel automatically defensive, which has always been my big challenge in
comedy, entertainment, different things like that. I think help.
I agree. I just wish we could have more of a sense of humor about politics. I think it would work. The George Carlin of politics, right? Exactly.
Yeah, we need him to.
But he's more of an anarchist, to be honest. He was just fed up with the entire system.
For real.
I'm not.
You've got your daily shows. You've got your, you got your Bill Maher's. You've got, plenty of people. It seems like people pick and choose their sides, though, right? It's not like, I don't know how many people are considered quote unquote in the middle or what have you. I mean, there's varying degrees.
There's a few. There's more than when the right talks about the silent majority, they're right, but they don't know what they're talking about. The silent majority is in the middle, that switches from election to election. And I'm a centrist, so I know the language that needs to be said to these people. Yeah. But to be honest, it's not enough sometimes. Sometimes you feel like, oh my God, you work, and there's not enough there to keep you sustained in your efforts.
No, I mean, that's, how I feel about that. I feel like we've been talking to the centrists for years, and that isn't working. What the right is doing is they're talking to people on hot button issues that evoke emotion. And so even if you're not all the way far to the right, their whole team aligns itself with each other, and they're still going to go. And they're still going to vote together, stay together, fight together. They're going to stay with their team or their gang.
Well, it's belonging. And I think that a lot of it with maintaining a central viewpoint on a lot of these hot button issues is maintaining some core principles and stepping back to source material. So like, how can something like racism end up getting kind of lost in the color blindness that we were mentioning a bit before? And it's just because, like, when we talk about racial inequality or inequality in general, we're talking about jobs, wealth, housing, and safety. Like, why did they need to make the law to help protect people? Well, because there was an inequality with safety. Some people just weren't safe because of who they were and how they were being perceived. And, when we get back to it, something even like housing, I mean, only just recently was racial descriptions stricken from the application for housing. There was a time when you applied for housing, for a very long time, you've always had to put your racial description there or ethnicity. But recently, I think 2018 or so, or 2019, it was removed now. In Seattle, though. I think just one place. I couldn't confirm other places. I think Seattle. Yeah.
That's rough if it's only being removed from place by place,
Yeah. But examples, that ripple out. But more than anything, like I was saying before, jobs and wealth. I mean, if you have the job or if you have the wealth, you can now afford your house and afford your safety. So it kind of dials back to some economic issues that I feel speak more to it than us focusing in on racial, gender issues that kind of have us back and forth. And that the fact that there's a class structure to begin with leads to our lapse of judgment. And now this racial hierarchy has a place to kind of slide between the cracks. And in some cases, go unnoticed, where we need to write books called, hey, I'm still here, because people are missing it. And it's very poetic. I was just going to dial back. 2018 was when White Fragility came out as a book. And 2019 is when How to Be Anti-Racist came out. So a year after.
Yeah. Yeah, but definitely two different approaches. One is like recognition, and one is like putting into action, positive steps. We do that at work. We have different, we have different, what do you call them? Different convenings. Some of them are specifically for white people to kind of get their stuff together and recognize how to fight racism, and some of them are for the entire groups together, so we can like identify and actively, fight back against racism.
What kind of like corrective behaviors or like new ways of thinking about racism do you approach on that subject matter, between the cracks?
I think some of it is just like folks recognizing, like some of it is like, steps like folks recognizing privilege, like we've done what would you call them, like little demonstrations where everyone stands in a circle and they say, if you've ever, gotten a job through your friend, take one step forward.
Oh yeah, I've played that game.
With two parents, take one step forward or don't take one step back. If English is your first language, and you just like go through all the layers of privilege so you can understand, you can understand like the layers of privilege and what different folks are going through and how it affects them.
Or even not calling it privilege, but advantage is, I think, the best. Yeah. Because sometimes, you can't help if your parents divorced or not. I mean, that's way beyond any child's desire or understanding. But two parents is definitely an advantage, for sure.
Well, yeah, and here's the thing. People, it's interesting that you say that, because people have these reactions to these words, and they automatically feel defensive, or they feel a need to challenge the words themselves, which is okay, but I think
it's understandable.
It's understandable though. I think we have to talk about it and figure out.
I wish they could. I also wish they could speak about it, and then we could figure out a better maybe terminology for them. Because my job, as I always saw it, was to explain complex issues in a simple form that everybody can get it, even with their busy lives. And maybe I'm using the wrong language. Maybe we're using the wrong language to get the same point across. And I've always said there's things that, for instance, that my aversion to the idea of defund the police, because it just scares people and they have no idea what we're talking about anymore. But even my dad fell victim to this. I spoke about my dad a lot. He's on my mind these days. But he has an aversion to this concept, and I sat there and talked to him for an hour, explaining that defund the police does not mean that we're going to be police-less. It just means that a majority of the funds go into support role, police department, counselors, negotiators, education, things like that. And when you stood that, it was a different story, Flav.
Yeah, I've been struggling with defending the way that these terms are put out there, but to be honest, I haven't heard the argument from the folks who put out these terms in the first place. I would like to hear them, because if there is something to be said about redefining the terminology in a way that, like you said, is more palatable for people, so we can get more support. That's something that should be recognized. But, I have this gut feeling that the people who came out with the terminology had certain strategies in mind. So I'd really like to do some research before the next time we meet. And
definitely. I'll take a look at it too. I'll take a look at it as well.
But all these terms, people have been saying defund the police. They've been saying Black Lives Matter. They've been saying, terms are making people not understand what they're trying to get at, and then it takes more time to actually
explain.
Get to the point. Though,
although I'm more supportive, I'll be very honest, Flav, I'm more supportive of the Black Lives Matter term, because it's a community under assault, and that's clear to me, clear as day. I've lived in Black communities. I know. Give me a break. I'm not a Black person, but it's obvious once you see the data that it's.
I lost some of your vocals there. Oh shit. I think I must be freezing up on you guys.
All right, let's give you some time to get back, and I'll try and repeat my statement.
Okay. No, I heard the last thing you said was Black Lives Matter communities under attack.
Yes. Okay. So like what I was saying is, once you see the data, once any human being sees the data, just straight up, what compared to any other segment in the community, except for maybe, of course, my Latinx cousins. They're similarly in a bad spot, but not even as bad as the Black community is in the spot. So,
are you talking about your cousins in general or specific?
Oh no! I'm talking about like the Latinx community as a whole being my cousins.
Okay. I see.
Yeah, and I mean, I like this perspective too, because it goes right into the whole communal equity stance, where like we look at what's being built in these communities and we look at what's not being built or what's being maintained or not maintained. I mean, there's been affordable housing projects that have been left to rot and to, be destroyed. And I think a lot of that speaks to, what a community under attack looks like. And, and I think being able to address it as an issue having to deal with that as an economic movement and help restore communal equity to these places missing it would be a big help. Something that I always reference Nipsey Hussle for doing such a good job with, and like really setting an example where like I'll go back and read a lot of what he was doing and get inspired. I have a couple of models built for communal equity designed entirely around what he was doing because it was genius. It was fast paced. There was no special language to it or anything, very bare bones.
Yeah.
And, when we use language, sometimes it helps, sometimes it hurts. The defund police movement, I've navigated through a few opposing views. It helps when I say, yeah, we want to refund the social programs. It's like we want to move funding around, but it's more of like a refund because we didn't get a fulfillment of services. Those that serve and protect us did not fulfill their duty in service and protection, so we want a refund as a society. So when I say that, now consumers are like, oh yeah, we love refunds. That makes sense. But I say
not just that, but when you say I want to train these police officers better so that they can handle the majority of their crazy job. By the way, it's not a pleasant job. So it's understandable that people are nervous, but when we're given the chance to explain, I think that's much better. But in order to be even afforded the chance to explain, we need to sort of dress down our terms so that they're not so harsh. I have a feeling, Flav, that what we're going to discover is that defund the police was meant to be harsh, to shock people. I have a feeling. It's just my...
I have a feeling too. My feeling is a little bit different, and this is all speculation on both of our parts, right?
Sure.
We're admitting off the bat. My feeling is part of it is to speak to budgets and in calls to action. So like when you say like defund something, like you're speaking to leaders who deal with budgets, right? And so rather than saying some term that people can say that they philosophically agree with, you're actually telling them to take an action. I want you to defund this in the next budget, right? I want you to take this particular action. So I almost think that part of it is like, it's specifically like a call to action rather than just some idea that people can claim to agree with.
Yeah, but if you don't get the popular support, you'll never get politicians. Unfortunately, politicians are a craven and cowardly lot, like Batman says about criminals.
Sure.
But the truth is they'll support anything as long as you have a poll behind you saying, oh, such of the population overall supports this action. And then people are – the only reason that we're getting these Confederate statues torn down is because the majority of populations in their state actually want them torn down. Yeah, this is not a minority. This is a vast majority.
Sure. Now, I do like what you were saying, Damien, and I do like the way it came across when you were like, people like refunds. Like that idea, that level of marketing to people is something that the left needs and we need to understand. You know, maybe if we call it the defund refund program, you know, even by calling it a program, it sounds like less threatening, right? It Absolutely. Sounds like something you might want to.
Something to just kind of add to how we're going to explore the language between opposing viewpoints. A majority of us are consumers and producers. So when it comes down to addressing a larger population with language, we want to use language that producers and consumers regularly understand. And that's easy enough because we are producers and consumers. But that's why I keep saying the race war and the gender war, they pull us away from what we do and who we really are. I feel that's my personal opinion, is that racial conflicts and gendered conflicts are making us forget that we are the producers of this show and we are the consumers of this content. And that was something that actually kind of came up in the other book, How to Be Anti-Racist. And
did they use that term race war?
Well, I'm sorry, what do you mean?
Oh, well, you just mentioned a race war. You know, whenever there is a group that has all of the power and exerts its power over another group and oppresses and suppresses the group, I always cringe at the idea that that's a war, right? I think a war is kind of when there are two sides in conflict. And I don't know. I don't feel like there's a race war in this country. I feel like there is suppression happening in this country and there's oppression happening. But a war would be like, you know, black folks are coming out against white folks in great numbers and with violence and oppression and tyranny, and that's just not happening. So I would think the same with women as well, with gender. So I would be, I don't know, I'm kind of a little bit careful when I use that kind of language because I think it
war specifically.
War specifically. I think it provides a false narrative of what's happening on both sides. That kind of speak that we often do. It's kind of like the Fox News, like we're going to.
You know, it's a term I've adopted from some opposing viewpoints on the extreme sides, where I've been told by some women that there is female volumes of females being killed off in the droves that we don't know about. And, you know, I take in what they're telling me and I'm accepting it as a possibility. It's something I may have missed. But as far as it goes, there's an oppressor and the oppressed. And I guess for me, that's more of a war that I see or feel is like, for sure, oppression is occurring, and due to silence, that is an issue. But as far as like the racial war goes, and how language gets used there, I mean, true to say, like, a war is hard for me to identify, but I can go back a little bit into some of what we're talking about, the KKK cult that was running around killing people based on, racial distinctions, and, skinheads, another thing, neo-Nazis kind of coming up here as literally,
I mean, before we get too into the weeds, my point still stands that that's not a war, right? That's a one-sided conflict.
Oh, okay.
Whether it's genocide, homicide, or oppression, it's a war when both sides are engaged. And there's like a battle over something, whether it's land or power or that kind of thing. These things that you've named, these are one-sided, horrific acts that are happening.
Okay.
I wouldn't call them wars.
Right. I haven't really identified other ethnic groups that have formed to specifically kill white people, and I haven't identified any female groups that have specifically formed to kill males. So for sure, I can't identify, this two-sided conflict to constitute war. So definitely, I'll attempt to dial back from that more, using the word war and sticking to oppressor and the oppressed languages. But something in these last few minutes of this, just to share with you guys, to reflect on and maybe step into the next one, is from the How to Be Anti-Racist book. And something he says that really stood out to me, I put this little quote down. He says, "To say something is wrong about a racial group is to say something is inferior about that racial group. I did not realize that to say something is inferior about a racial group is to say a racist idea. I thought I was serving my people, when in fact I was serving up racist ideas about my people to my people. A racist culture had handed me the ammunition to shoot black people, to shoot myself. And I took it and used it. Internalizing racism is the real black on black crime, manipulating us into seeing people as the problem instead of the policies that ensnare us." And I felt like that was some potent stuff right there, lots of poetry in it. And if you had any reflections on that, as far as racist languages begetting further racism.
Well, I will say that the people who suffer typically from racial violence from these groups, from the skinheads and the Ku Klux Klan, tend to be other white people. I think the stats bear me out on this. They tend to attack, quote unquote, people who are soft on racism, or people who are race mixing, but they tend to attack other white people first. And then their secondary targets tend to be people of color or sexual orientation or something like that.
At least from what I'm about white supremacists.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I was just trying to address some of what Ibram Kendi was saying about, being given the ammunition for racial conflict, and then him using it very effectively through speeches in schools, but then realizing that by using that racial language, he's allowed a system to manipulate him into seeing people as the problem, when really it's the policies that are the problem. So it just was an interesting take that he had in a book called How to Be Anti-Racist. Yeah, if you guys
what was he saying as far as people being the problem? You're talking about racists being the problem, or?
He was saying racism in general. Like in a part of his speech, he went on to talk about how, the problem is that, we're not stepping up to the plate to speak about these problems. We're being silenced about these problems. We're dreaming of becoming sports stars, and we're dreaming of becoming something that, is distracting us from the real issues. And he went on this huge speech. And
this is a black author?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Ibram X. Kendi.
Okay.
And he goes on to, it was a speech that he gave on Martin Luther King Day, year 2000, he mentioned. I'm trying to recall. I only wrote down this one part of the quote here, and I just started tapping into it. But again, it's to say something is wrong about a racial group is to say something is inferior. So because he was saying like, hey, listen, you guys, we're not doing our part. We're not kicking the rocks or whatever. He realized in the midst of this, looking back on his speech, that he was giving, he took the ammunition and he fired it. And the ammunition was that racial language, was that criticizing of a group, the generalization and marginalization of his own people, because he was attempting to ensnare them and incite a movement. But by using that language, he ended up feeling that he had damaged some of the movement itself. And and this is just in the introduction to this book. Keep in mind, I'm a very, very slow reader.
So he was basically saying that it's his criticism of his own people was adopting like the language of the oppressor. Is that what he was saying? Or?
Right, like as opposed to like sending people out in the world knowing how not to be, and even as opposed to saying like this is how you should be, it was a matter of finding a middle ground and essentially establishing some family values and saying like, people, we need to focus on us being people and fixing policies that are interrupting our abilities, not that we the people have any particular problems as any particular group, but that the policies that we're ensnared in are the real issue. Kind of like what Royal was saying about the communities and how communities are under attack.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that's a real statement, because I often do hear hurtful statements, including from people in the community, saying, oh, we need to take care of our own stuff first before we ask, for the police to stop killing us, or before we ask for this or that. We need to like take care of our own problems in our community first. And, to me, that always sounds like, so what you're telling me is we need to be perfect before we're treated like human beings.
Yeah. I was going to say the
Whereas
dehumanizing
white
aspect.
people are not held to that standard.
Exactly. Whereas white people are not held to that standard, whether they're poor or whether they're going through drug abuse or problems or any of that.
Well,
and it's an impossible
like
standard.
And it's like what I say with the opioid epidemic. Like
And you're just a little bit quiet. Okay.
Back in the 80s, when it was like the crack epidemic, like it was this whole thing of like, oh my God, criminals, yada, 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 et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But then like when it comes to the opioid epidemic, when it's white people getting hit, they're like, oh, it's an addiction, it's a disease, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, exactly. Is that a real background, or is that a...
It's a virtual background, but a real picture of the view out of my window.
Oh, nice.
It's nice. It's a nice view. Unfortunately, it was not a nice day though.
Not the day I took the picture, but
no. But it's a nice view though. I like the buildings and everything. Very nice.
Yeah, we spy on people all the time.
An ironic note on this kind of seeing is that being exempt from the identification of your race, that ends up being part of the problem, because you're unaware of your own self-involvement. But it also ends up having a little bit of like the hair of the dog that bit you kind of cure, where the exemption from racial identification in general, just like how they removed it from the housing applications, could end up being a part of an answer to think about and to kind of come up with ways as how we can navigate around that identification issue.
Well,
hey, so we're going to end soon.
Remove the question.
We're going to end soon. Are you going to put your...
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Great. Well, I'll see you there in a moment.
Yeah, when you come back, just expound on what you meant by